This happened to me when I was 10. I was sleeping in my room. Suddenly, the entire house started to shake with a huge crash, just like an earthquake. I was awakened with panic. I was trembling with fear, thinking that was an earthquake. At that moment, I heard my dad scream in his room. I ran to his room right away and saw a mysterious being standing in front of him. It was as enormous as it was about to break through the ceiling, and my dad was absolutely overwhelmed with that horrible ambience. The horrifying creature talked.
In 5 years, you will be dragged to hell.
My dad cried and begged desperately on his knees. No! Please, I beg you, I have a little boy! The being blustered in a threatening voice.
You committed the unforgivable sin. You will burn in hell.
Then it disappeared. My dad collapsed to the floor, devastated. Next day he looked so grim and nervous. I was also frightened, but I didn't talk about what happened last night. After several days, we went back to our normal routines, as if we completely forgot about that day. Time passed away in an instant. And exactly 5 years later from that day, my dad vanished. The police handled it as a missing person case. They tried to track all his records and follow up on clues, but couldn't find anything. It has already been 2 years since his disappearance. His whereabouts is still unknown. In the CCTV records, the police saw my dad leaving work by driving away in his car from the parking lot of the company building. Then, his car was found in a distant alley. Only his clothes remained in the driver's seat, as if somebody took his body away. My dad disappeared, and nobody could find him. I had prayed to God every single day since then, to find my dad. I swore I would do anything if I could see him at least once. Even if he couldn't come back to me just once, I would be fine. I prayed over and over, asking if he was still alive and where he was. Every night I prayed and cried myself to sleep. And last night I had a dream. That mysterious being showed up again, and this time in front of me. It was the exact same one I saw years ago. He said to me,
Come with me, if you want to see where your father is.
He took my hand and brought me outside. Immediately after stepping outside, the environment completely changed. It was hell, with boiling lava and sharp penetrating screams of millions of people. It was too hot, and I felt my body was burning in the fire. Because of ear-splitting cries and screams, I couldn't step forward anymore. And there, I saw my dad standing in the middle of hell. He stared at me with wide open eyes, not saying a word. Right in the middle of chaos full of endless pain, he gazed at me with eyes filled with pain and agony. I wailed, calling him, but no matter how loud I shouted, he didn't answer. He was just gazing at me, suffering in enormous pain. The mysterious being standing next to me said,
Your father killed an innocent person 2 years before you were born. That is the reason why he is here with me, in hell.
I couldn't believe that. I started to run to my dad, but at that moment I awoke from my sleep. I was awake, but I still felt the sizzling heat all over my body, and its pain. After that dream, I didn't look for him anymore, and I didn't pray anymore. I think it might just be a silly dream, but I can't forget that heat, those horrifying screams, and my dad's eyes, because all of it seemed so real. I don't know why, but I feel like my dad is in hell.
I have hated my stepmother ever since my father married her. It was obvious that the feeling was mutual, as she hated children. My father tried to pretend that we were one big happy family, but it was clear that he knew the truth. She enforced these stupid rules on me that I hated. The dumbest one was no electronics at nighttime, as she thought I wouldn't get any sleep. Thankfully, my father listened to reason and made her drop this one. However, unfortunately, I had to obey her other pointless rules, like bedtime by 9, and I wasn't allowed to watch any shows she didn't agree with. I spent a lot of time at my friend's home over the next few months, just so I didn't have to deal with her. Dad's work is sending him away for a conference, so he will be gone for a week. I begged him to let me spend the week at one of my friends, but he refused. He kept saying that it would be the perfect chance for us to bond. After he left, she had a smirk on her face, as she knew that she was the one in charge of this house. I went to my room and decided to spend as much time here as possible over the next week. It was about 9 p.m. She walked into my room and told me to go to bed. Then I noticed her grab something from my bedside locker. When I confronted her, she reminded me of her rule about no electronics at nighttime. I begged her to return it, but she walked out of the room. I ran to the door and heard a key turn on the other side. There were footsteps walking away as I realized that she wasn't going to return it. Just then, I started to feel lightheaded, as I hadn't eaten in a couple of hours, and there was nothing to eat in my room. I ended up banging at the door, begging her to return my insulin pump, but she pretended like she couldn't hear me at all.
My friend Max was one of the types who always did the best he could in school. He played basketball and everybody loved him. One day, he was on his way home from school, and a girl by the name of Chloe followed him. While they were on their way, she asked Max if he could be her boyfriend, completely out of nowhere. For your information, this girl had never spoke to him before. No thanks. I'm not really looking for a girlfriend right now. He answered politely and left. And I guess this angered Chloe. A few days later, Max was walking home as usual. Just then, he saw 3 guys walking up to him. One of the guys said to Max, "Where do you think you're going?" "Home," Max replied. He didn't know that he was in danger until one of the guys took out a knife. The tallest guy suddenly pushed Max to the floor, and the rest started beating him up. Then the guy with the knife cut Max's back. Luckily, there was someone who had seen the altercation. He shouted at the 3 boys to stop when Max screamed in pain. As they ran away, the guy called the police and the ambulance arrived in a few minutes. Max woke up in the hospital in severe pain. Then he heard the police speaking to his mom saying, "Ma'am, we've arrested the 4 suspects, 3 boys and 1 girl." To his surprise, the girl was Chloe. It turns out she had called 3 of her friends that just happened to be gang members and requested for them to stab Mike and beat him up. Chloe ended up being expelled from school, and those 3 boys were sentenced to 8 months in jail for helping Chloe in the assault and for stabbing my friend Max. My name is Donovan, and this is a true scary story of mine that happened to me when I was 4 years old. It was a late Friday night. I remember it raining outside, and my mom had put on a scary movie. But about 30 minutes into the movie, she fell asleep. So I was watching the movie alone, and in the movie, a demon was going around killing these teenagers one by one after they summoned the demon in the woods. I stupidly decided to give it a try, to summon a demon. But I gave up after 10 minutes, as nothing seemed to happen. An hour later, I was going to use the bathroom, but I realized that the entire apartment was dark. At that time, I was deathly afraid of the dark, and I didn't want to go, but I couldn't just hold it anymore. So I finally gathered some courage and got up to use the bathroom. But before I made it to the bathroom at the end of the hallway, I saw a dark figure. It appeared out of nowhere, with red glowing eyes, just like the demon from the movie. It couldn't have been my mom, because she was still sleeping on the couch. And it couldn't have been my dad either, because he was still at work. I was scared to death and ran to tell my mom, but when I woke her up, she said that I must have had a bad dream. When I looked back again, it was gone, but I couldn't get it off my mind. I couldn't sleep that night, and things got much worse the next day. Around 8 or 9 p.m., my mom made me go to bed, but when she left the room and turned off the light, that same demon appeared again and jumped towards me. I just hid under my covers the entire night, but in the morning, I was surprised to see a big long crack in the mirror near my bed. Now I'm 14 years old, but I still remember the incident like it was yesterday.
This happened to me when I was going to school in Los Angeles during the spring of 2012. I grew up in Indiana in a very safe community, so it took a while for me to adjust to the craziness and crime in the city. I was living in an apartment with 4 other women at my college. Our place was above a house, so to access it you had to go down a long alleyway next to the house and up some stairs, so it was pretty out of the way. On this particular day, I stopped by the apartment to grab some music before a choir practice, so I came inside and started gathering my materials on the kitchen table. I didn't bother locking the door since I would only be there for a few minutes. There was a knock on the screen door, and when I looked up, there was a man standing on the doorstep. He was a young Hispanic male, medium height, and wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Hello? I called out to him, thinking that he was delivering a package or something. The man doesn't say a word and reaches down and opens the screen door. He then begins to walk towards me. Still at this point, I was not alarmed, starting to say something about him leaving the package on the table, when I noticed he didn't have one. The only thing in his hand was a box cutter. By the time I realized this, he was too close for me to escape, and he put the blade against my neck. He then told me to get up and walk into my roommate's bedroom next to the kitchen. He locks the door and pushes me onto the bed. My mind is racing the whole time, telling myself that he probably just wants to rob me and that I will let him take whatever he wants. As I'm sitting on the bed, he starts looking around the room. He then grabs some telephone cables next to the bed and begins trying to tie my wrists together. It wasn't working too well, but he kept trying. I eventually snapped out of my trance, realizing that this situation could become even more dangerous if he binds me. I screamed and started pushing him. I made a break for the door. He caught me and tried again to tie my hands together, but I was thrashing and screaming and kept hitting him in his head. After a few seconds of this, he decides to bail and runs out of the apartment. I followed him, screaming for help. One of my neighbors who lived in the house under our apartment came out within seconds and saw the guy running down the alley and chased him into the street. We called the cops, and they came right away. I ended up going down to the station, where I worked with a police sketch artist on a composite that ended up being posted on the television. They caught the guy within a week. The police officer who responded to the scene said that there was a local gang that required new members to cut off the nipples of women and bring them back as an offering. Ever since this experience, I always tell people to lock their doors, even if they're just stopping by to grab a few things. You're better off safe than sorry.
This happened several months ago. We had a store beside our house in the big hut, and there was always a guy who would come in and purchase beer in the store. He would always get it for free and said that he would pay for it all in the next month. However, he never kept his word. 1 month later, me, my mom, and my dad were staying at our hut. While they were eating dinner, I was in the back playing video games. After a few minutes had went by, the guy came in to get a beer for free, and this time, my mom and dad had got mad at him. Dad asked him to pay the bill right now, and this made the man angry. They started yelling at each other, and my dad told us to go back inside the house. When the guy just suddenly left, I could see him bringing his AK-47 and sitting on the chair. Pack up your things and spend the night at your grandma's house. Dad told us as my mom and I got in the car to get ready to head to my grandmother's house. One of my cousins was staying there, so I spent the night with her playing video games, and my mom was watching TV with my grandma. The next morning, we woke up to my dad's phone call, and he had told my mom what happened last night. That guy tried to break into our house. Mom eventually called the police, but the man was never found. The next day when we returned home, Dad told us our dog had died. He said he was found with a big gash on his neck, which was most likely the cause of death. And one of our neighbors heard intense barking that night. She also saw a guy walking around our house. After the investigation, the police found out that he had an axe which was used to kill my dog. Since that horrific incident, my dad's friend and cousins went to our house to guard for the nights. And unfortunately, the guy was still never found. I hope that I don't encounter him in the future.
When I was 21, I lived with my ex-boyfriend in Southern California. It was the first time in my life that I was on my own and had the freedom of being out from under the watchful eyes of my parents, which made me a bit reckless. We lived in what was considered to be a safe neighborhood. Nice houses lined the streets. Cal State University was nearby, and we rarely heard of violent crimes happening in the area. One late Friday night in July, at approximately 1 a.m., my boyfriend and I got bored and wanted to get out of our hot apartment. We decided to walk several blocks away to a lovely park that had an artificial lake where ducks and geese would gather. There were benches around the lake where you could sit and watch the water. The sky was clear, the moon was out, and it was a hot summer night in Orange County. The park was surrounded by an expanse of towering trees and thick bushes. My boyfriend was a naturally thin guy with long hair. I was 5'5" and weighed 100 pounds at the time. We sat on a bench to watch the rippling water as the moonlight reflected off its surface, with the trees and bushes at our backs. Out of nowhere, the bright headlights of a police cruiser came speeding through the adjacent parking lot, the vehicle's frame bouncing off the concrete speed bumps as red and blue lights flashed. It then came to a screeching stop, and a spotlight was shined into the trees. We both thought, "Shit, we aren't supposed to be here. The hell do we do?" We may or may not have been under the influence. This was remarkably bad timing. We knew the police saw us, so we just stayed because if we started running, we would risk being chased down and arrested. However, The cop didn't approach us right away. We looked on for a while and wondered, what the hell's going on over there? We thought maybe the officer caught a drug deal going down. We couldn't make out a whole lot through the trees. Eventually, the cop approached us. We thought for sure that we would get arrested or fined for being in the park while it was closed. What the officer told us was truly terrifying. He was doing a routine patrol when he spotted a man in the trees watching us. He then told us that since my boyfriend had long hair and was thin, the man hiding in the trees most likely assumed that we were both females, seeing us from behind. My boyfriend's ego was shattered. Once the cop saw that the stalker was slowly moving closer to us, that's when he decided to turn on his lights and rush in. What he found on the man was alarming. He found an arsenal of knives, handcuffs, zip ties, duct tape, and a gun. The kidnapper's field kit, basically. I was overwhelmed by fear. We were very lucky that the cop had seen him creeping around in the bushes, because it would not have ended well for us. We thanked the officer and proceeded to walk the few blocks back to our apartment in silence. I feel very lucky to be alive today, and we never returned to that park again.
It was just another winter day when I went to my friend's house for a party. We were playing video games and one of my friends suggested to go out for a walk. So we decided to go for a walk and started getting hungry along the way. We went to buy snacks from the local convenience store. After getting what we needed, we were heading back home when we heard someone yelling at us. "Hey!" We quickly stopped and turned around to see a group of teens hiding behind a car. They were just staring at us. We hadn't thought much of it until one of my friends pointed them out and said, "Look guys, I think those guys are following us." We all turned around quickly again to see them trying to hide. We then started to walk faster, and my friend wanted us to take a shorter way home through a small ditch. While walking through the ditch, we again heard someone shouting at us. When we turned around, we saw the same group running at us. Then my friend said, "Run!" and we all started to run back home as fast as we could. Suddenly, I got a call from my dad, asking when we were going to be back home. I asked him to wait outside the house for us, because some people were following us. When we got back home, I rushed to hug my dad and told him to call the police right away. When we were waiting outside for the police to arrive, I heard a stone hitting my window. When we looked out, we saw the same group of guys in our front yard. When the police arrived, we gave them our statements and the guys quickly headed off. Ever since then, my dad put up security cameras around the house. A few days later, while I was sleeping, I suddenly woke up to a loud noise. I quickly noticed a dark shadow in the corner, so I rushed to turn on my lamp. I was shocked to see a guy that I recognized his face. It was similar to the guy in that group that day. I screamed out loud and my dad came rushing to my room. He was as surprised to see that guy and tackled him to the ground. While he held the guy, he told me to call the police. After a while, the police arrived and they arrested him. I then remembered that we had security cameras, so I told them to check it out. While watching the cameras, we saw that he had entered through an open window. I was in total shock. I'm glad nothing has happened ever since. But I still wonder what could have happened if I would have never woken up.
I hate watching TV with my family. Every night it's the same thing. At 6:30 p.m., Mom and Dad are on the main couch with both of my little brothers. My little sister sits over on the small couch with my older brother on the recliner. They don't have room for me. I don't care. Ever since my dad got the new top-of-the-line HD TV, something weird began to happen. They don't watch anything good. No movies, no streaming series, nothing. They just sit on their butts and silently stare at the blank 60-inch screen. I mean, from the way they act, it's clear they think they're watching something, but I just can never tell what it is. They'll be sitting there all dead silent, then burst out with the loudest, most obnoxious laughter you've ever heard. And one other night, they just suddenly started screaming for no reason, with their eyes wide with terror. It's not like normal screaming either. High-pitched. Super disturbing. The other night, they did that for 3 straight hours. They were all hoarse the next morning, but none of them knew the reason. Sometimes I try to ask what they're watching, but they just told me how stupid I am and told me to just see for myself. If I say it's because the TV isn't on, my dad tells me I'm being a smartass and I can just leave if I don't want to join the family. But I don't want to leave either, because the TV isn't always blank. I never know when it's going to happen, but every night it turns on for a little while. My family doesn't seem to notice though. What actually displays is a grainy black and white image of a family watching TV, as if it's recording them. Sometimes it'll glitch out and 1 or 2 of my family members will flicker and disappear from the screen for a second. That'd be unnerving enough, but that's not the worst of it. The main reason why I even sit in the living room with them is that it allows me to know where they are. The ones I call the guests. The guests creep into our living room from the fireplace, the back door, the office, the hallway, everywhere. And I can only see them through the TV screen. There's the goat-legged thing who likes to chew on my mom's hair. There's a boy with a snake head who whispers evil things in their ears. The tall blinking thing that wants to kill me, and the girl with 3 mouths. I don't want to see them anymore. And there are many more that I don't even want to begin to describe. So, I just sit there and watch them. That's why I don't sleep alone anymore.
I would describe myself as a loner during my high school years. I would often play video games, keep to myself, and not socialize with anyone outside of a few friends. One day, my friend, who I'll call Charlie, told me that he was having a sleepover at his house on Friday, and I agreed to join. When Friday came, my parents drove me to his house. Charlie and I headed straight to his basement and played some Call of Duty until around 11, when his mom told us it was time for bed. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to hear a thud above me, as if someone was stomping on the floor above us. I tried to wake up Charlie, but his subconscious told me to fuck off. I tried to go back to sleep, but I heard another loud thud above me about a half hour later, followed by heavy footsteps. I heard the basement door slowly creak open. I decided to hide in the closet, behind some coat hangers. After a while of waiting, I ended up dozing off. I would say I woke up around an hour later, to the sound of heavy breathing. I looked up, and what I saw next sent chills rushing down my body. Through the slits in the closet door, a pair of eyes were peering in at me. My stomach felt as if it was about to explode. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself from screaming. I went further back into the closet and hid in the darkness, and stayed there until the morning. I didn't mention anything to Charlie or his mother about what I saw, To this day, I don't know who or what came down into the basement and just stared at me through the closet door. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it. After that night, I stopped going to Charlie's house.
This happened to me when I was 15 years old. One day, me and my friend were planning to go camping in the woods. We packed everything we need, and my dad drove us to the camping site, which wasn't that far away from my home. After we arrived at the entrance, we started to go deep into the woods. When we found a good place to stay, we finished setting up our tent and eat our sandwiches. It was around 10 p.m. and we decided to go inside to get some sleep, as we were really tired at that time. Next day when I woke up, I looked around and realized that my friend was nowhere to be seen. I got out of the tent and started to look around, but he wasn't there either. I went deeper into the woods to see if he was playing with me, but no. There was not a soul inside at all. That moment sent a shiver down my spine, so I eventually packed my things and started to run towards my home. When I got home, I didn't tell my parents that my friend disappeared at first. The next day in the morning, I took my bike and went to the same place where we camped to search for him again. As I went deeper into the woods, I saw an abandoned cottage. It looked quite old and dirty. I knocked on the door but nobody answered. Then I noticed the door was slightly open, so I pushed it to get in. It was dead silent. I started to walk around for a while and the first thing I saw was a door in the corner. I got to the door, grabbed the doorknob and opened it slowly. What I saw at that moment was something that I can never forget to this day. To my horror, it was a dead body. It was my friend. I couldn't even let out a scream. I ended up running out of the cottage and rushed home with all my might. But still, I couldn't tell anyone about what I saw. My friend's parents cried and struggled to find their son, who never returned home. What's even weirder was his body was never found in the cottage when the police had a search in the woods. We don't know what happened to my friend, and I guess we will never find out. My name is Ahmed. I am 23 years old and love to visit different places around my country. As I live in Saudi Arabia, I decided to go north, around 600 kilometers away from me. It was about 3 p.m. when I started my journey, and I was still on my way when it was 7. It was the winter season, so it usually got dark fast. I got hungry while I was driving, so I tried to find the nearest gas station. After about 20 minutes, I found one that had dim lights and seemed very old. It had a very creepy vibe to it, but still, I went into the store. While buying some snacks and drinks, I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I asked the man at the counter if there was any bathrooms nearby, and he told me where to go. I was on my way to the bathroom when I heard screaming. What the? Confused, I stood there for a while and then saw a body thrown out of the bathroom, which looked like a bloody mess. That was all I could see from that distance. Then I saw someone walk out of the bathroom. When I hid behind the nearby wall, a man in his mid-30s dragged the body and took it to a shed-like place. I could tell that he was in a very awful condition, as he had markings all over his face. He had a knife in his pocket, and his clothes were covered in mud and blood and were all worn out like he never changed them. When he was done dragging the body to the shed, he started to walk towards my car, which was my only escape. I was terrified to approach my car, but luckily, he went away. After making sure that no one was around, I ran to my car. I started my car and stepped on the gas to escape from that place. When I drove far away from that gas station, I found a mosque. I stopped my car close to it, ran inside, and found the imam who leads the prayers at the mosque. After telling him everything that happened, he gave me a bottle of water to calm myself down and called the police. The police arrived in a few minutes. They questioned me and eventually went to the gas station to investigate. I was still staying at the mosque waiting for them, and the police came back about an hour later. They said that the guy was arrested. It turned out he's been hiding in the place for about 7 years and killed the people who entered the bathroom. What's even more horrific is that his parents and his wife were killed in the same bathroom. And after killing those people, he dragged their bodies to a remote place where no one could see. Eventually, he was sent to the prison and was sentenced to death. I could have been killed if I didn't see that body in the bathroom and just went inside. I'm glad that I am fine now, and I am thankful to God for saving my life. One last thing that I want to say is, please follow your instincts and always make sure you're safe in situations like this.
My name is Caleb, and I live in Pennsylvania. Not near any big cities like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, so you can imagine it's a pretty woodsy area where I live. This happened some years ago when I was 11. It was my 11th birthday, and I had invited 8 of my friends, but for this story, there's only 2 of them who really matter. And their names are Landon and Mateo. To give you a basic layout of my yard, you have my house and driveway on the left, and if you move a little to the right, you'll get to the pig pen, and behind the pig pen is a big pine tree. And let's say you decide to go even further more to the right, you'll get to my neighbor's house. My dad knew that some of my friends hadn't been over to my house before, and didn't want them to end up into my neighbor's yard, so he built a little fence just to make sure that no one would go into the neighbor's yard. During my birthday party at one point, we all decided to play manhunt. I don't know if I played it right or wrong, but we made 2 teams, a seeking team and a hiding team. After an hour or so, almost everyone said they wanted to go inside. I told them that they could go inside if they wanted, but I was going to go ahead and stay outside and search for Mateo, who was nowhere to be found. Everyone went inside except for me and my friend Landon. We both decided to search for Mateo. We split up at one point, and I was behind my house looking for him, when I saw a dark figure in my driveway. I guess the other person saw me too, because he rushed around to the front of my house. I chased after him since I thought it was Mateo. The figure then ran up to the pig pen and went around the pine tree. I swear at one point, I heard a strange laugh, and it didn't sound at all like Mateo. It sounded like someone else, but there was something very off with that laugh. You kinda had to be there to really understand it. At that time, I didn't think much of it and continued to chase him. Once I went around the tree, he was gone. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find him. While the fence was small, you couldn't jump over the fence that fast. That's what scared me. I heard something drop beneath the tree. I moved the branches out of the way and shined my flashlight towards the tree, but there was no one to be seen. Being absolutely scared to death, I began to run away when I saw Landon. I got him and told him the entire story. He didn't believe me. I told him that I wasn't splitting up again, and he said that that was okay with him, and we both started to search again behind the house. We were getting bored looking for Mateo. We were shouting for him and screaming, but after a while, we decided to give up. Then, in a sore and raspy kid-like voice, we heard from behind us, "You can't give up. You still haven't found me." We both turned around and saw that same black figure running back up to the pig pen. I was terrified. Landon quickly convinced me that it must be Mateo, just changing his voice and trying to scare us. I nodded, and we both ran after him. When we were only a few yards behind him and about to get in the pig pen, I told Landon to run around to the other side. He did, and I kept chasing after the figure. But just like last time, once it turned around the pine tree, it was gone. I saw Landon run around the other side. We were both terrified. We then heard in that same sore and raspy kid-like voice say, "I'm right here. Come and catch me." Then came the sound of 3 to 5 heavy pair of boots stepping onto the ground from what sounded like almost every direction. We both screamed aloud and ran back towards the house. Mateo came out of the other side of the house where he was hiding the entire time, and we both told him to run inside the house with us. We got inside and everyone looked so confused seeing us all so scared. We told them what had just happened, and they didn't even believe us. I was just so shocked that not even my parents believed us. It wasn't like we were saying that there were zombies or something, but something so much more plausible. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Now there's another part of this story, and I still believe to this day that this part of the story is connected to what happened that fateful night. 2 years passed from that night, and one day, I decided to walk around my neighbor's house since she was on vacation, and I surprisingly hadn't been there before. I walked around her house wanting to see what it had looked like. When I turned around the other side of her house, my heart literally felt like it dropped. I saw a kid with long greasy hair and a dirty face that looked the same age as me. He was smiling and gesturing with his fingers for me to come with him. I was so scared I could barely move. Then he screamed, "He's right there! He's right there! Get him! Get him!" Then I heard 3 to 5 pairs of footsteps coming around from the other side. I was able to finally move and started to sprint towards my house. Luckily, my dad had taken down the fence after my 11th birthday, so I had a straight path right to my house. While I was running, the thought came to my mind that these were probably the same people from my birthday party incident that happened 2 years ago. Once I got back into the house, I looked through the window to see if they were still there, but they were all gone. I told my parents, and just like last time, they didn't believe me. I collected all of my savings I had from doing chores, and I begged my parents to buy security cameras for the house. They finally agreed. Soon we got security cameras and connected it to the security app so that it would alert our phones, just in case we weren't home and someone was going to break in. I'm older now, but I still suffer from PTSD from that incident. I have no idea what they would have done if they would have gotten a hold of me. Were they pedophiles or psychos or just looking to kill me? When I think of it, it still gives me goosebumps to this day.
This is a true story told to me by my grandmother a few years ago. I had brought up Bigfoot as a topic and showed her the famous Ohio howl. She snapped to attention in fierce recognition and said, "I heard that one time when me and your grandpa were fishing on the river." It happened down in southeastern Oklahoma, west of Broken Bow Lake, when my grandparents decided to go catfishing in a spot we'll call the Big Hole. This was their favorite place to catch catfish, as the depth of the river allowed for bigger fish than what was normal. And so after a long drive into the woods, they picked their place along the bank and set up their gear. Sitting on the bank, they were enjoying the nice time period between sundown and nighttime, feeling the cool air from the water cooling them off from the fleeting sun's rays. That's when they heard what was described as a yell from upriver. Now it's at this point I have to say that my grandmother is a sweetheart, but in some situations, she lacks some common sense, as when she heard the yell, the first thing she did was to mimic it. They went back and forth between each other for about a minute, before it stopped, and she thought that was the end of it. Hours pass, and sometime around midnight, they hear the same yell again, only it's closer and louder than before. If you're wondering whether she tried to mimic the yell again, the answer is yes, and again it was a back and forth. However, this time when it stopped, there was silence for a while. Suddenly, an enormous splash came from just up the river. After the first splash, there was another, and another, until they realized it was rocks being thrown into the water, steadily coming closer with every throw. My grandfather decided that he'd had enough and started to pack everything they brought, telling my grandma to go start the truck that was sitting at the top of the embankment. Once she got to the top, she froze at the trailhead because she could see a dark figure in the trees standing next to the truck, yards from where she was. This figure was taller than the truck by at least a foot or more, and easily towered over her. She could hear this thing breathing heavily, not in a tired way, but more aggressive, as if to say, "I know you're here, but I own this land, and you aren't welcome." Right then and there, my grandma made the smartest decision of the night and walked right back down the bank to my grandpa so she wouldn't have to be alone with that thing. When she got back down there, he asked her why she hadn't started the truck, but all she said was, "Let me help you and I'll tell you later." They finished packing and now had to return to the truck, but once they got there was no sign of that thing she had seen. Relieved, they hopped in and sped out of there as quickly as possible. In the truck, she told him of the figure she saw by the truck, and the two of them swore they would never go back. To this day, they still haven't, and now that the roads going there are all blocked off by the Forestry Service, I doubt they ever will. I marveled at her story because not only was she someone who didn't make up tales, she was also a very experienced woodswoman and had accompanied my grandpa on many hunting and fishing ventures. So to say she knew about the animals that should and shouldn't be in the forest would be an understatement.